that will be recording this conversation. You might choose to, hide your camera. You might choose to, if you're not comfortable with that, not showing your name, we just want to let you know. So today we welcome Brent Diaz on behalf of Beyond the Veil. He's also one of us. Thank you so much. It's always an honor. We're always grateful to really work with you to support our community. And Brent, welcome. Please talk to us about yourself, who you are for people who don't know you, what you do, especially the work you are doing, helping people, as a trauma therapist. So much you have done for our community and many communities. Welcome, Brent. Please tell us about yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's certainly my honor always to work with Beyond the Veil, and I really appreciate, don't take it for granted, the opportunity to speak to the Rwandan community and to also other guests who are tuning in as well, but particularly the Rwandan community, as I know that to talk about trauma, to talk about genocide, like all of these pieces, it's very complicated, and even just to sort of admit and talk about mental health, it's something that I know that is not easy and is a new concept for some Rwandans. So thank you for having me. I never take it for granted, and I always appreciate this opportunity. You can see there's a little bit about me there, just on the slide. I do teach at a couple of universities and a seminary in Canada, and I've taught internationally in various countries, and I've also consulted with services in Kigali, Rwanda. But what Lydia was referring to is, on top of all that, my full-time job is actually as a trauma therapist for newcomers and refugees living in the Toronto area here in Canada. So basically what I do is I work in a joint program with CMHA of York Region, and they are working with the agency that I work with, which is called Cedar Center, and together we provide a service for mental health for newcomers and refugees. And within that program, clients who are showing trauma symptoms, who are having problems with trauma, they are then referred to me, and I work with them as a therapist. I've been a trauma therapist now for, I don't know, it's been 16 years or something like that. And I've done other kinds of work on top of that as well. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's sort of where I'm at. And so in order to get a hold of me, Lydia has the information, Beyond the Veil has the information. You can contact them through their social media channels if you're interested in this service that I provide, just to get some support or even just to ask questions about mental health or trauma. I'm certainly willing to do that with anybody who would have any questions. So without further ado, I know that we actually have a short time today. We're going to leave some time for questions towards the end. But my part of the presentation is actually not very long. I can be very long-winded, and these are things I can talk about all day long very easily. So I'm going to try to give a bit of time. And some of the slides will go by relatively fast. I might even have to skip some. I probably over-prepared. But what are we doing here today? So basically what we're doing is we're basically looking at the idea of the pandemic and COVID-19, what people are going through with this. I know here in Ontario, there's a lockdown. We're not really going anywhere. Of course, I'm in my home right now, as are, I'm sure, most or all of you, if you're watching from Ontario, Canada. So we have this idea of the pandemic. But at the same time, the whole kind of aspect of Beyond the Veil is that the people of Rwanda and Rwandan people have gone through so much, just genocide-related pieces as well as other pieces, I'm sure. And so the question is does the pandemic somehow make the trauma worse? Does it somehow bring up things in a different way than it might for other people? And you can even wonder, is the pandemic itself a form of trauma in a way? And so we wanted to help a little bit to look at these pieces. I think our fundamental idea is that yes, the pandemic can make things worse in terms of if you have a trauma history, the way that things have kind of are structured with the pandemic and the struggles that people are having with it can really make trauma symptoms worse. And so therefore, we also want to provide some suggestions and ideas on how to deal with that. So here's how we try to help. So how is COVID-19 impacting us? How does it affect those of us with past trauma? And then what can we do about it? That's the basic framework that we want to do. And then again, we'll have some questions at the end as well. All right. So if you don't mind, I guess hold on to your questions. I'll just go ahead and keep going. So how is COVID-19 impacting us here in Canada, and as well as people around the world? I got this research from, in terms of Canadians, so just to give you an idea, but it can be represented for other populations too. So many people are seeing their stress levels double since the beginning of the pandemic. Maybe it's not a surprise, but if you're feeling more stress as a result of the pandemic, then you're not alone in this. People are struggling with fear and uncertainty about their loved ones and their health. I know for me, I have parents who are older, of course, and family members. And not only that, but I had a cousin and her daughter who are younger than me, who also both had COVID recently. They both recovered, but of course, there's a lot of stress and uncertainty and fear about that. Are they going to be okay? Are they going to recover? Right? So there's a lot of stress about that. Of course, there's concerns about employment and finances, right? A lot of people are off work right now and are not sure how to provide for their families. That's a worldwide thing as a result of COVID and the lockdowns and some of the ways that things have been structured. For those of us who are in quarantine and physical distancing, and I would guess that probably most of us are in some kind of physical distancing, this is impacting people negatively too, right? That social isolation that we're feeling. I don't know about you, but I feel less connected to people in general because of COVID. And this has been going on for months now. So even though in the summer there's a little bit more mixing with people and we were able to kind of visit a little bit, it's still not the same way that it used to be. And for a communal culture like Rwanda, this is a huge piece, right? And I wonder if it's worse for the Rwandans living in North America, because I'm not exactly sure what the quarantine measures are like in Rwanda, to be honest with you right now. But I know, for instance, in Ontario right now, it's very strict, and in Quebec too, I understand. And so if you're part of a communal culture and you're being encouraged to not participate in that community, that's going to have a profound impact on how you feel. So that's a huge piece too. The social isolation piece is something that we really need to pay attention to and wonder about. 81% of Canadians reported the pandemic is negatively impacting their mental health. Again, probably not a surprise, but people are feeling worried and anxious. And there have been some studies already that have come out that have linked the experience of quarantine to symptoms of anxiety and post-traumatic stress, sometimes with long-term effects. So this is something that, again, I'm probably going to deviate from my slides because it's just the way I am. This is something that we really, really need to pay attention to. I think this is really important for the people who lived through the genocide in Rwanda particularly, this idea of quarantine and what it means and kind of being shut in your home, right? Now, just so you know, I'm not going to go into any kind of details about the kinds of things that people are experiencing either through the genocide or even now, right? Like I'm talking very broadly about the pandemic because I don't want anybody to feel triggered or overwhelmed by this. But I will make a reference and say that, having spoken to people who lived through the genocides and hearing their accounts, for those who were hiding out in various areas, their movements were restricted. They weren't able to interact with other people for weeks and weeks on end, right? This idea of now, having the government kind of tell you, well, no, you can't move, you can't go, you can't meet, you don't have freedom of movement right now. That, even though it's a very different situation, there's still an element of it that people might find triggering. People who lived through the genocide, specifically in Rwanda, might find that this idea of quarantine triggering. All of a sudden, they can't just go and reach out to their family members and friends the same way they used to. Your movements are restricted, and there's this element of danger associated with it, right? And so it shouldn't be a surprise to any of us then that even the experience of quarantine can have a different effect for people who lived through the genocide than it would maybe for other people who didn't live through the genocide, right? Someone like myself, I didn't live through the genocide, so I don't have that same kind of reference point of having lived through something like a quarantine before. Whereas other folks who have lived through that confinement that they experienced during the genocide, there might be some pieces there that are somewhat similar. Okay, I know these slides are wordy. Most of my slides aren't this wordy. And I also will go faster. Women, so other vulnerable populations, in terms of COVID-19, women who've lost their jobs, those who are worried about, women, and then people who've lost their jobs, of course, people who are worried about their finances, people with children at home, that's a whole other difficulty, right? And young people are more likely than others to experience anxiety and depression during this time of COVID. And also, there was interesting studies, which I think applies to the Rwandan Canadian community, of course, that racialized people are more likely to suffer more severe health effects or die from COVID, with Black people being at greatest risk. And in Toronto itself, the communities with the highest number of racialized people have the highest number of COVID infections and related hospitalizations. Now, that might be due to the whole communal piece, right? Like, I know of different cultures, people from different cultures, but they're all racialized cultures who are all like at different points in the year meeting together more, bending the rules a little bit more, because that's part of the culture. Like this idea of just being in your home by yourself is just so foreign, right? And so we have folks who are just out there, just mixing a little bit, and then therefore perhaps the rate of infection is higher. There might be other reasons too. There might be reasons related to housing, reasons are related to how people, different families are multi-generation families are living together. Pieces like that might be all an aspect of this. But nevertheless, and there might even be other reasons too that we're not even talking about. But nevertheless, I think we have to pay attention to this, that COVID-19 is an even more severe issue for racialized communities with Black people at greatest risk. So again, let's keep that in mind. Other vulnerable groups include Indigenous people here in Canada, people with disabilities, people with dementia, immigrants and refugees, which of course, many of the Rwandan Canadians would fit into that category, workers with low wage employment, and people who reside in crowded or communal housing, such as shelters. There's also been an increase in domestic violence due to isolation, and people with pre-existing mental health issues, including post-traumatic stress disorder, would have lower mental health during the pandemic. So I think I've kind of set the stage. I think it's clear that COVID-19 is really impacting us. It's causing an increase in substance use in Canada as well. For those who use alcohol, cannabis, and tobacco, that's likely to have increased, and people who have mental health before the pandemic are more likely to use these substances to deal with it. And I think also that we have, maybe because of the quarantine, we have like less people really kind of, like it's more hidden, I think, right? It's not like it's sort of out, in parties and stuff so much. It's like people kind of using these substances on their own to deal with their traumas. Now, I know that there are questions coming in. I don't know if it's questions. Let me just double check. Chat. Oh, thank you. Okay, it's just our social media to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter for Beyond the Veil. So please do access those if you want any information. All right. Again, we'll have questions about what I'm talking about later on in the presentation. So in terms of trauma and COVID-19, remember what I said earlier, that several studies have linked the experience of quarantine to symptoms of anxiety and post-traumatic stress, sometimes with long-term effects. So, and the example I gave was the example of quarantine and people in Rwanda who were confined in their homes or in other places, right, camps and things during the genocide, and how that would be exacerbated during a time like this. But generally speaking, in other words, people who have experienced difficult past events who are still impacted by these events, also known as trauma, are at risk of worse difficulties during COVID-19, okay? And so that means a population like Rwandans who have experienced so much in terms of trauma, I'm not saying that Rwandans are weak. No, in fact, it's the total opposite. My humble opinion is that the Rwandan people have done an amazing job in dealing with something that was just incredibly horrible, right? But I think that it is important for people who have experienced something like the genocide and who are still impacted by it, perhaps even on a daily basis, to just be aware that some of these pieces are going to be alive for you in a different way than they would be for other people who haven't been through the same thing. And so we just need to be aware, and with that awareness, focusing on things like self-care and what you can do to deal with whatever symptoms are coming up for you, to continue to heal, and just remember and recognize that COVID-19 can cause a greater risk, right? Now, in terms of trauma, what is trauma? Just in case you're not 100% sure, I wasn't sure who was tuning in. I don't know if, who we have here really. So just really briefly, if you've experienced or witnessed events so extreme, severe, powerful, harmful, or threatening, and they require extraordinary coping efforts, that is one definition of what trauma is. Trauma can also be seen as a state of physical or emotional shock which may be a result of real, anticipated, imagined, or forgotten experiences or encounters. Trauma may occur at an individual, a group, and a cultural level. And like I said, there's just so much. We could talk about this forever. Just this one slide alone, I could spend hours on. But really, probably most of our focus today is going to be on the individual level. But of course, the genocide was experienced at a group level and at a cultural level. And again, this is something I think the Rwandans are leading in. You all are leading in terms of how you've tried to and are succeeding in repairing the culture, repairing the ties you have with each other. But this is an aspect of trauma that I think is so important when we're talking about something like the genocide, how it impacts on a cultural level. And then when you lump in and you bring in COVID-19 into it, again, we're having a situation where our culture is being impacted in a different way again, but there still might be, like, because of the less meeting together, the quarantine, the social isolation, it might just be harder right now to really work to tie these cultures together, you know, to continue this work of healing on a communal level. One of the things that I do for my job, of course, is working with, the main thing that I do right now is working with immigrants and refugees. One of the things I want to do is I want to have groups, but we can't have groups right now. And I want to have culture-specific groups for different groups that we have major populations of in New York region. But we can't do that. But yet, research has shown that for trauma recovery, for a lot of the different cultures, including for Rwandans, group work is actually so healing. Like, if you can do it in a way that's really safe and really helpful, coming together as a group, a community, is so powerful. And that's because the trauma is experienced on that level, right? But yet again, in quarantine, it's a whole different thing. It feels like you can't do it the same way. So this is why Beyond the Veil is offering these conversations, these times together online to be able to address some of these pieces and still build that community, just in an online in a different way. So it's following like a best practice that way, if you can look at it that way. So the bottom line is that there's distressing, overwhelming impacts that can impact events that can impact us on a variety of ways. And then we have different reactions. And we have different reactions to these events that serve to protect us when we're experiencing this overwhelming event. And these reactions, these protective reactions that we have, which can be physical or emotional or cognitive, like thinking, can stay with us for a long time, long after the event is over. The genocide happened, you could say decades ago, and yet there's still people who are reacting in a way to kind of protect themselves, right, from being hurt again. And so that's kind of the bottom line of what trauma really is. Trauma really is just thinking about, it's like your alert system in your body is really sensitive now after you've been through the trauma, and it's very sensitive, and it's trying to protect us from experiencing the same kind of event that we've had in the past. All right, so think of it this way. When we experience the symptoms that we're going to be talking about in just a couple moments, it's actually our body's way of trying to protect us. And so you can look at it this way. Your body is actually it's not that there's something broken or wrong with it. It's just that it's so attuned to danger because of what you've been through, that the alert system is fired, or is triggered, I guess, by like the smallest thing. That's in a nutshell what is essentially happening for a lot of us who've experienced trauma. Okay, I'm just going to check the chat here for a second. So someone asked, I know, I probably don't have time to do this now, but hey, we're all a nice community here. You said that trauma can be a shock resulting from real experience, anticipated or imagined. Are you saying that it can be a result of our own imagination? What I'm trying to say is that it can be a result of our perspective, which is a little different. Imagination, I don't think I would use that word, although I think I understand what you're saying, but it's more our perspective. So for instance, I've had clients, again, without going into any details and not being triggering, I've had clients who've just told me that the only thing that happened to them was that words were spoken to them, threats were spoken to them. And because of these threats, they have lived decades of their life with the trauma symptoms that we're going to be talking about in a minute, right? And they've had to deal with them. Nothing physical ever happened to them. Nothing. It was threats of sexual violence. The sexual violence never happened. It was just words. But it was words from a person who had influence over them, words that they believed that were really, really scary, and just those words brought up the symptoms. All right. So trauma is a matter of perception. Now, for something like the Rwandan genocide, perception is, it's everybody who lived through that saw, heard, and people who've maybe been related to people have heard the stories. They're all horrifying. They're all right. There's nothing imaginary about that. And I know that's not what you're implying at all. So that might feel a little different, but in terms of other kinds of traumas, perception is everything. I've had things happen to me that some people would say, "Oh, that would be so traumatic," and I was just like, "No, it wasn't a big deal. My perception was that it wasn't that bad," right? Whereas other people have been through things where other people would say it was just words, like nothing ever happened to you, but to that person, again, it was traumatizing. So that's kind of what I was saying there. All right, so let's move on here. So what parts of trauma are kind of triggered by COVID, right? What are the parts that are really an issue in terms of like this combination of COVID and trauma, right? Because I tried to show you very quickly that COVID-19 is making trauma worse, or can make trauma worse for people, and the research is showing us this. And I'm kind of anticipating that this might be the case for some Rwandans. So what exactly are we talking about here, right, Brent? So as the research talked about earlier that I mentioned, anxiety was a big theme, right? There was a lot to talk about anxiety being worse for everybody almost everybody during COVID-19. And anxiety is one of the trauma symptoms. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through a list of trauma symptoms, actually. And these are the trauma symptoms that are actually correlated to COVID-19. So symptoms that you normally would see in someone, even in a non-COVID era, who they would experience these symptoms in COVID-19. They're also symptoms, or they're made worse by COVID-19. So anxiety can be like a free-floating general sense of anxiety, or it could be really specific to certain objects or situations or people, right? Certain phobias that people might have. And with generalized anxiety, it might be hard to pinpoint. It might just be like this sense of doom that you have, or just fear, right? I know that I've had moments where I'm thinking, what happens if my job gets affected by the lockdowns, and right? And then you start to worry. And some of you maybe have even been in that situation where it has happened to you, like your job has been really affected, and it's hard to earn an income now, right? So there's anxieties about all of this, and again, maybe anxieties about loved ones getting sick. The bottom line is, if you already have a history of anxiety, maybe due to trauma, then the pandemic is just it has that possibility of spiking that anxiety a lot more. So in other words, we need to be really conscious and aware to really be focusing on our anxiety to ensure that we're not becoming overwhelmed with it, right? So we'll talk about some self-care pieces in a little while to deal with that. Social withdrawal, that was another one I talked about, right? Social withdrawal is a huge trauma symptom. Most of my clients are socially withdrawn. They don't really go anywhere, even before COVID. They don't go anywhere. They don't really talk to anybody. They don't open up, right? Even people from communal cultures have a hard time connecting with people in their culture. And so they might do this as a way of because they feel shame about their trauma, or because they're afraid of exposing themselves to people who are going to hurt themselves, right? Or it might be unintentional. So maybe, maybe it's because of their anxiety, and it's just, they're overwhelmed, it's too much. And so therefore they're pulling away from other people, and they're not trying to pull away from other people, but they're just so preoccupied with their anxiety that it's just what they're doing. And it can be made worse by stigma and shame as well. And, I know that, I think that Beyond the Veil is just such an important piece, because you have mainly, now obviously I should have said at the beginning, I'm not Rwandan. That's maybe clear in the way that I'm talking. But I know that for many Rwandan people, talking about things like mental health and trauma, and, it's really complicated. It's stuff you don't really talk about. And that's why I'm so amazed that you would invite someone like me into a conversation like this. And I'm really grateful for that. But because of the stigma of mental health in the Rwandan culture, and kind of the ways that people deal with mental health, it would be easy to not really open up and to kind of remain closed off to talk about it. And that can kind of make things worse. And I think COVID-19 could just, people can just make almost the excuse, well, quarantine, so I don't need to talk to anybody right now. And they're not telling people that they're actually struggling and they're actually hurting. So that's one connection you can make, that COVID-19 is forcing a lot of us, particularly here in Canada and in other countries in the world, to not reach out, or it makes it harder to reach out to ask for help. So we have to make that extra effort. And we're talking about a culture in Rwanda, with Rwandese people that maybe wouldn't necessarily just open up that easily about, trauma and mental health anyway, right? So to do that, it takes extra effort, but it is so helpful when you can reach out to someone who understands, who's going to not judge you, who's going to support you, and who's just going to help you to move through and talk about these pieces and discuss them further. So there's that symptom. There's a symptom of dissociation. And this one, I think also, I've read studies, and more importantly, I've talked to Rwandan people who've been in the genocide when I was in Rwanda, and also I've worked with people here in Canada too from Rwanda, and they've talked to me about dissociation. It's that feeling of feeling disconnected from, like, maybe your surroundings around you, or maybe your body even, in a way. And so an example would be kind of like what I was saying about it being in hiding for weeks, and like you have to, your mind just, where does your mind go, right? There's things happening around you in the community, in the neighborhood, that you don't want to be thinking about. And so where does your mind go? Your mind kind of disconnects from it. And I've had all kinds of people tell me about that, that they've kind of experienced that. And if you're not really sure what dissociation is, here are just some examples that I got from a tool that talks about dissociation. So feeling divided, as if you have several different parts of you, like a happy part and a sad part, or a strong part and a weak part, or an older part and a younger part. I know that seems kind of weird and maybe even extreme, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe you feel like this, like maybe you feel like you have these different parts of you, like you're kind of like a divided person. Dissociation could also be feeling very detached from your behavior as you go through the motions of daily life, right? You're kind of just in a fog in a way. Maybe you're suddenly waking up in the middle of doing something that you were like unaware of what you were doing, like maybe when you're driving or cooking dinner or something. People think you live in your own world. You're kind of like, kind of spaced out in a way. Or maybe you're not sure about what's real or unreal in your surroundings. Or you go into trance so much and for so long that it interferes with your daily activities and your responsibilities. So the idea is that dissociation is something that is also brought on by the pandemic, particularly if you're, again, quarantined in home. And like, I think part of us, maybe for a lot of us, we're kind of dissociated about what's happening in the hospitals, right? And people getting sick, and right? We don't want to think about that, right? We just kind of like, okay, I'm going to pretend that's not there and I'm going to watch Netflix, right? Or whatever, right? I'm going to just talk to my friends online or something, or read a book or something. When the reality of what's happening, even in our communities, probably in every community, is very difficult. And then you also have the idea too, like, I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like time passes differently under in the pandemic, right? Like some days feel like they stretch for like a week, and some days it goes by like that, right? Like it feels like I just woke up and then the day's over. So I feel like being in quarantine, this idea of dissociation is something that I think is prevalent for people, particularly if your job's been affected and you have less to do and you have a lot of time in your hands. That could also exacerbate dissociation. So depression is another trauma symptom. Interestingly, it's commonly paired with anxiety. It feels like opposites, but it's the same thing. I can actually explain that. I won't explain it today just because of time, but frequently people who have depression related to trauma also have anxiety. And so this is characterized by low motivation, low energy, sad feelings and thoughts, right? I think a lot of us probably are familiar with the general idea of depression. And like we said earlier on, COVID-19 is bringing on depression in people, right? People are struggling just with feeling hope. People are struggling with their energy. And for those of us in North America, we're also in the winter now, and a lot of people struggle with the weather and the lack of sunlight and things like that, which also brings about these same symptoms. So as you can see, I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to like you're guaranteed to struggle with depression if you've been through the genocide or have family members who've been through the genocide, and you're living through the pandemic that you're going to end up with depression for sure. I'm not really saying that. But what I am saying is this is something we need to look out for, right? This is something that's impacting millions of people right now in the pandemic. And then, of course, for those of you who have this past of the genocide and maybe tendency to kind of struggle with some of these pieces already, it's just something to kind of keep in mind that we need to be proactive to deal with symptoms like depression, because there is a link there, and it's going to be harder to deal with as the pandemic goes on, particularly maybe around pieces of hope and then energy levels especially, and maybe even motivation too, actually. Really probably any aspect of depression now that I think about it. Okay, flashbacks. I'm just checking the chat here. Yeah, it's a great question. We will talk about that later on though, towards the end. So hopefully that's okay. Thank you though for asking the question. I'll come back to it specifically as well. And I am looking at my time. We'll probably do the question and answer probably closer to 2:50. Originally we were thinking 2:45, but I'm just wanting to make sure that we cover some hopeful pieces instead of just looking at just the negative, heavy symptoms. So flashbacks is the intense re-experiencing of a traumatic event. It feels like it's happening all over again. So a really, really brief example would be, it feels like the genocide is happening all over again, like all of a sudden, right? For whatever reason, something's been triggered, something's reminded you of it. And in extreme cases, people don't even remember that they had the flashback, or they almost lose track of where they are, like in 2021, January 2021, right? Instead, it feels like they are literally back, in Rwanda during the genocide. And so I was kind of wondering, I wonder if the pandemic is bringing this on for people. And really, I was kind of thinking it was more along the lines, again, of the quarantine more than anything, and the social isolation, that maybe it feels like to some people like they're kind of reliving aspects of what they went through. Again, I know it's very, very different, and I respect that, right? And I'm not saying that, oh, all of us in quarantine now know what it's like to live through the genocide. Like, obviously not at all. But there might be elements of it that to have a flavor of some similarity, which might then bring about a flashback, right? So again, it's just an invitation to be aware that this might be something to be on the lookout for, particularly around the confinement. And so it's just something, again, that I was kind of wondering about. Not that I really saw specific research on that, but it was just something that I was thinking about. Sleeping difficulties and nightmares is another trauma symptom, and it also might be something that's exacerbated by the pandemic. It might just be a result of anxiety, right? Like feeling too revved up, right? I know that I personally, the pandemic affects all of us, right? Like I've had nights where I've had a hard time falling asleep because I've been thinking about pandemic related stuff, right? So you can imagine someone, again, who has a trauma background, who already is struggling with nightmares or sleeping difficulties, they might have a similar issue in terms of COVID-19 making that worse. There also might be nightmares involved. Many folks who've been through trauma experience nightmares. And again, there might be aspects of this that are also made worse by the anxieties and the pressures that people are feeling during COVID-19. I want to say, I don't think I have a slide on it too, that let me just see how much. Yeah, I've got a lot. I'll have to probably pass through some of these slides really quickly. But I want to say too that this COVID-19 has also corresponded with a lot of complications. I don't know how you would word it. Complications or awareness or issues around anti-Black violence and racism in particular, right? A lot of, especially in North America, but I know that it's sort of, the awareness around it has floated around overseas everywhere. So without getting into all of it, I think there's an element of the pandemic is being like there's like a whole other piece there of anti-Black racism that's happened during the pandemic. How much the two are related? I mean, anti-Black racism, at least from my point of view, is something that's been going on for centuries, right? So we're not just going to just blame it on the pandemic or anything. But there's layers of things, of experiences that Black people, and I think Black people who, like the allies of Black people too, and maybe other people of color for that matter, are experiencing, right? But particularly Black people. Black people living in North America, but even worldwide as well. I know there's been instances in Europe too of things that have happened, of violence against Black people. So you could almost layer all of these pieces too. Like that might be just yet another pressure to be considering in terms of some of the things that some of you are experiencing if you identify as a Black person, maybe a Rwandan whose family or you yourself have been through the genocide, you identify as a Black person, and you're seeing all of this, some of the ugly, awful, terrible things that have come up in terms of anti-Black racism. I mean, it's already been there, but verbalized and come about in very intense ways. And then there's COVID on top of all this, right? So for you to feel maybe anxious or depressed or discouraged or having sleeping problems or having flashbacks or just feeling like you're having a hard time concentrating, it's really understandable that you have these symptoms. And it's not that there's anything wrong with you, it's just that you're dealing with so many layers of things that are really, really difficult to deal with, all right? So I wanted to kind of emphasize that. Now, I know I'm going to be doing future talks for Beyond the Veil here, and I'm going to manage my time better. I over-prepared because I'm so excited about this topic, but I'm going to cycle through some of the slides very quickly just so we can get to what can we do about our symptoms. To be honest, though, I've covered a lot of the major ones, right? So some of the other trauma symptoms are things like body memories. These are like you actually feel like there's something in your body that reminds you of the trauma. That it's not even like you're thinking about it, it's just you feel it in your body. It's hard to explain in a really, really brief, quick way, but even like the body position, you know, a certain body position that you take can trigger a certain memory, right? Or if somebody touches you a certain way, it can trigger a memory, right? This is a trauma symptom, and I know that right now during the COVID-19 era, I think a lot of people are starved for touch. We don't hug people the same way we used to. We don't shake hands even anymore, right? So I wonder then if people's body memories are more sensitive right now because we're not being even touched. So if someone were to touch us, it's almost like, whoa, that's not usual anymore. So there's a symptom to keep in mind. Maybe some of you can relate to this. Intrusive thoughts, these are thoughts that come in. It could be memories, it could be self-statements like I'm a bad person or it's my fault. This is a very, very important part of trauma. It's something that I've seen a lot in the clients I work with. So I wonder, is this something to be aware of, that maybe those are coming in? Panic attacks, this is like anxiety that goes through the roof, so to speak. People become really overwhelmed, right? And so that might be another thing to look at. There might be agitation, hyperactivity, or irritability. You might feel really restless, or a person might feel revved up, again, due to quarantine mainly, right? Like just feeling like you can't, you know, I think we see this a lot in our kids. For those of us who have kids, right? Like our children are just, I'll speak for myself. Some of my kids are just like, oh, like they don't know what to do with themselves half the time. And even as such, periods of relaxation can end up feeling foreign and unsafe somehow, which is a little weird. Earlier, I talked about there being more violence in homes these days. And so this can be a result from social isolation or being high alert or frustrated in various ways, and can be complicated by substance use as well. So this is something else we need to be aware of during the pandemic, and there's research already that's shown that there has been an increase in domestic violence. So we definitely need to be aware of that. Difficulty concentrating, all of those symptoms we've talked about already can lead to someone having a hard time focusing. Again, very understandable. Okay, so emotional numbing is an aspect too. Could be related to dissociation or depression. And I think that's really interesting. You know, it's like the emotions are there, but people try to numb them out somehow, one way or another. So this can also, I personally feel like this is part of the pandemic that's impacted me a little bit, you know, in my bad moments and my rough days. Like I just feel kind of numb, like I just don't want to do anything. I don't want to think about anything. I don't want to feel anything, right? Because it's an overwhelming thing that you're facing. So again, if you lump COVID on top of the genocide experience that you might have, if this is one of your go-to symptoms already that you have, then it's like you could feel really numb right now with all of this. People have been using more substances, like I said, and eating problems is another thing. People used to joke early on in the pandemic, oh yeah, I'm adding all this COVID weight now. And, I think that's when we thought the quarantine was going to be like 2 or 3 months. And now here we are 10 months later, and it's still going on, at least in Ontario, Quebec. So this might be another way that people deal with their feelings. And I'd be interested to know if this is an issue that Rwandans face. I don't really have a sense. I think there's some Rwandans in Rwanda who don't really have the luxury, of having eating problems. Like they kind of just make do with what they have every day for survival. But there might be other people who do use food to numb their feelings out one way or another. So I wanted to get to this, and I'm really aware of the time. So what can we do about this? So Brent, you've laid on a lot of heavy things on us. So what can we start doing? So this is what I think Beyond the Veil are posts. Like there's been, if you've been paying attention, obviously you have been because you're here today. There's been so many posts that they offer with self-care techniques, things to do, different tips. So, I can almost say, go back and go through our Instagram, go through our Facebook posts and read and start applying. Maybe take 1 or 2 of the ideas that we've talked about on there and start applying those to your life, because this is a huge piece. Even in the midst of pandemic, when our options of what we can do is kind of limited, we can still do things to take care of ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And there's different ways we can do this in case you haven't seen the posts. For instance, you can stop whatever you're doing, close your eyes, and take 10 slow, deep breaths. If you're feeling really overwhelmed, if you're feeling discouraged, right? You can visualize your safe place. This is just a place that you're loved, that it's peaceful, that it's a place you can rely on. For me, it was my grandmother's house. Like my grandmother, whenever I go there, I knew I was going to be loved. I knew she loved me, accepted me. I knew that I didn't have to be someone different. I knew I was safe there. And so I can just visualize it and think about my grandmother's house, and that there's all kinds of things that happen in our brain that actually makes us feel actually better in our bodies. It takes us away from whatever we're facing for the moment, right? So something like that maybe. Go to a quiet room, read a good book, meditate or focus on your special relaxation phrase. That could be something like, God loves me, or I'm loved, or we're gonna get through this. Or there's all kinds of different phrases that you can share or that you can learn. It might be something from the Bible, right? If you're a Christian and you read the Bible. It could be something that a loved one has told you, right? Whatever phrase. It's in counseling talk, it's called an affirmation, but really it's just a phrase that is true, that's positive, that will encourage you and help you to feel better and move on, right? Another one might be, I'm just gonna take it one step at a time, right? I'm gonna take it one moment at a time, 1 minute at a time, even if you have to, right? Or I'm good enough, or I can do this, right? It's just stuff like that could be really helpful just to get through the moment. Listen to your favorite music, sing out loud, dance, play. I'm going to check the chat real quick because I see there's some questions. Oh, thank you. Yeah, someone's again posted the social media. And actually, how about just because of time, we're going to blend the question period with me sharing more self-care stuff just because of time management. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat and I'll get to them as I'm going through these other ideas. So this person asked how to maintain emotional well-being during the pandemic period, especially for people who are confined alone. Perfect. Some tips. So that's what we're going through. And if these tips aren't really like answering your question very well, then please let me know and we can try to flesh out something more personalized. But here's some other ideas. Watch something funny. I do that personally. I watch YouTube videos that are funny. I'm not going to necessarily recommend the ones I watch because we all have different tastes and different interests. The videos I watch are like, about movies or whatever, right? But yeah, it's certainly helpful to engage in funny things and to know that there are still things that we can laugh about. There's memes. Well, maybe you haven't. You've maybe seen the meme about Bernie Sanders with his mitts, right? Sitting there. I don't know if you've seen that over the last couple of days, but just funny things that people are putting up online, just to make people laugh. We can still spread joy that way. Go outside and take a walk in a safe area if you're allowed to, again, depending on the pandemic rules that you have. Here in Ontario, we're allowed to go for a walk outside. In fact, before this time together, I went for a run, and that's like the only place I ever really go to, except for maybe grocery shopping or getting gas. I don't go anywhere else right now because we're in lockdown, but I do go for usually almost daily a run, and I can look at my neighbors, the different neighborhoods and stuff, but you can go for a walk too. It doesn't have to be a run, right? You can run in place for 5 minutes. I got this, that wasn't my idea. I got this from the source that I got this from, but it is something like you exercise, in other words, right? Exercising is actually really important to deal with the pandemic and some of the depression and anxiety symptoms that we have. And I encourage my clients already to exercise as part of their treatment plan. I know there's a couple questions that came in. I'll just finish reading this slide, or kind of just explaining these points, and then I'll go to those questions. Call a friend, so important. Let's break this isolation one way or the other. For me, I know that doing like a Zoom call or like a FaceTime chat with family members, it's so good. Most of my family doesn't live in the area that I live in here in Canada. They're live in another country altogether, so I already have that separation from them. But doing Zoom calls with them is just so nice. I feel like I'm right there with them. We talk, we joke, we catch up with each other. You hear their voice, you see their face. And it's just a beautiful time. And it's not necessarily even talking about the difficult things. It could just be talking about just whatever's going on in life, right? And getting that mutual support. So call a friend, call a family member, or do video chat with them. You can talk to an adult if you're a child or a younger person who understands and listens to you, or not even just a child, like if you're a child, but if you're an adult, you can talk to a caregiver, like a counselor, like a therapist, like someone from beyond the veil, or a pastor or a religious leader, or another trusted person, an elder of some kind, right? You can talk to these people, maybe your doctor. I mean, someone who you know is going to understand, who's going to listen to you, who's going to take you seriously, and who will give you some non-judgmental advice as to what to do about what you're experiencing, right? It's really important to reach out for help. And I know, again, maybe counseling and therapy is a new idea or a scary idea for some of you, but you can really just look at it as talking to someone who's professionally obligated to treat you with the respect and the non-judgmental and the confidentiality that you deserve, really, you know? But a counselor or therapist is just a person who has just read a lot of things, right? And who understands a little bit about trauma, and so therefore they're not going to judge you, or about mental health. They're not going to judge you when you talk to them. You can also write in a journal. Volunteering right now is hard to do, but there are opportunities to volunteer. And I actually do this myself, and it's not just pie in the sky, just wishful thinking, but things are going to get better. Indeed, the actual pandemic numbers are going down in certain countries right now, including in Ontario and Canada, believe it or not. I know it might not feel like that, but the numbers are going down, okay? If that's something that you're concerned about. There are things will get better. Even, you know, there's the vaccination. There's, you know, with every day we're getting more research on what COVID is and how it spreads and what to do about it. So even though this is kind of a long haul that we're in right now, it's not easy, but there is hope that we're going to get through it. And other pandemics that have been, you know, similar severity have lasted this long. So it's not even out of the ordinary that it's lasted this long. And we have the worldwide movement that's dedicated to dealing with this, which is preventing people from getting sick and you know, worse effects. So we can take some hope in this. All right, so the questions that have come through so far. Thank you, Chantal, for your greeting from Rwanda. So nice that you joined us. Thank you so much. And I can imagine the weather in Kigali is so beautiful, right? Not only is it amazing people, you know, recovering from trauma and all that, but beautiful country, beautiful weather, amazing food. You know, I just loved it there. So thank you for your greeting. Just thinking about Rwanda and the hills, and like when I landed in Kigali, it was nighttime. So all you could see around you were the hills with like the lights on them. I was like, oh, this is a beautiful place. So thank you, Chantal. Okay, Judith asks, would masks be an example of something that would bring flashbacks during the war? People would cover their nose. Yes, that's right. That is right. Yes. So people wear masks during, yes, I've seen videos, I've seen footage of that, and I don't need to say much more about that. Again, without I'm trying not to trigger folks around here, but Judy, that's a great point. And so therefore, the using masks, seeing people with masks in public, walking around on the streets even, or in the grocery store, and the few stores that we can still kind of go to right now, this is something, or even on TV, you'll see, you know, now you're starting to see people on the news or whatever wearing masks. That's a particular trigger that's important to notice. So you know that if that is a trigger that affects you personally, to then prepare yourself as you're going out, as you're going to a place where you're going to see someone with masks on, to understand and to remind yourself that no, this is 2021 and these masks are due to, they're actually a good thing. We're trying to prevent the spread of possible, you know, virus here, as opposed to the reasons why people wore the masks in the past. That's actually an excellent and yeah, tragic.
Hey, hi, Brent. I have a question. So not too sure, I know you are an expert in this field. It's something that I've read saying that, you know, the trauma is stored in our body's tissue.
Yes.
So how does someone get to learn how to release the trauma from their body?
Yes, that's a great question.
Can you talk about that part?
Yeah, great question. Probably, again, something else I could spend hours on talking about. In a nutshell, trauma therapists, and I'm not trying to plug myself, right, at all, honestly, but trauma therapists are trained to help people to release the trauma that's kind of held in their body, that anxiety, that energy that they have, that, you know, that sense of, we call it hypervigilance, like always being scared or nervous of things, even nervous of masks, right? There's therapeutic techniques that have been studied that we have that can help release that. But also talking about things helps to release it. Just talking about them in a safe location where, again, you know that you're not going to be judged and you can like share these things, you know, with some openness. I personally have the bias that exercise can also help, like moving your body, right? Can help can help. I'm not going to say that it totally changes things. There's people who are incredibly fit, who exercise all the time, who still struggle with trauma, right? But it can help. It can really help to release some of that. And also another really important way, like if you don't really have access to any of that kind of stuff, allowing yourself to feel your feelings. And so rather than masking them with alcohol or food or just covering them up, allowing yourself to cry, even if it's just you by yourself, can actually help to kind of move, for lack of a better term, to move the energy in your body that has to do with trauma, right? So those are just some really quick ways to do it. But I think even having the kinds of conversations we have here with Beyond the Veil are helpful. People are thinking, people are considering, they're talking about it. Maybe the feelings are coming up a little bit. It's okay, right? Your feelings are a part of you. They're normal, they're natural. As long as you're not feeling too overwhelmed, you can express them. You can express them in a journal. You can allow yourself to cry. Things like that are important. It's a great question though. So hopefully that answer was clear. I'm just looking at the chat now. I'm not even looking at the slides anymore. A small comment to mention that that those who were young or born during the genocide still experiencing the symptoms. Yes, it's another amazing thing to talk about that I didn't really talk about. And in fact, I read a news report that talked about this just in preparing for this very talk today. Indeed, intergenerational trauma, that's what it's called. It's a thing, even if they were born after the genocide. Just having family members who went through it, you can experience the same symptoms, okay? Some people say that it's through our bodies, like literally through the mother to the womb. Other people say that it's also due to like the way that people, like the older generation talks about the genocide, can in a way almost traumatize or impact the younger generation. Whatever the explanation, yes, it does impact. And so therefore, if you're feeling these feelings and having these trauma symptoms, even though you didn't live through the genocide, there's a whole phenomena. You can go online and read about this. There's a whole bunch of people who didn't go through the genocide, who are still feeling those feelings, the younger, new generation. So very, very interesting to think about. And I'm just looking through the last few comments here. Oh yes, so talking yourself through it, Judith said. Yeah, talking yourself through the trauma, very, very important. And indeed, there's other pieces here that I could have talked about. but I know you've set your schedule and your time to wrap up now. So
Yes.
I'll just leave this slide up and you can kind of look through it really quickly. There are other things too, but these are just really practical things to talk about. The great thing is that the next few weeks of topics with Beyond the Veil are going to expand on these. There's going to be more self-care things that other speakers as well as myself will be talking about. And there's going to be posts that are going to be talking about different tips and ideas that are going to build off. So this is just a start. So don't feel like if any of these don't really fit you personally, know that there's more information that's coming. And just by you being here to talk about these pieces is important enough and is a great start to the work. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to hand it over to Lydia now. If you have any questions, again, you can, well, I did offer my email at the very end of this. As you can see, I had many other slides. If you want to email me directly without involving Beyond the Veil, you can use this email address. It's confidential, so you can write it down right now. I'll leave it up for the rest of our time. Or you can contact me through Beyond the Veil as well if you have any questions, okay? So please don't hesitate, and I'll keep it confidential and treat it professionally. And thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in and for listening and for your thoughtful questions and comments. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brent. A really great conversation. And I'm going to ask their people prefer to ask their questions without chatting. We can add another 5 minutes and then we close the session. If you have a question, I might have unmuted everyone. Please let me know so I can unmute you in a way, because last Saturday we had an experience. We wanted to have a little bit of control to avoid hackers and all of that. But in a way, thank you so much, Brent. You know, at Beyond the Veil social media platform, we have shared with you the links. On Monday, we share with you, with our Rwandan community, some tips, some mental health tips. I think I'm gonna have to unmute Sibo, one moment. Okay, yeah, Sibo has a question. One moment, Sibo. On Monday, we share, every Monday we share social media, mental health tips. And on Wednesday, we share educational posts. That means, you know, we pick up a topic and we go, you know, in depth about, you know, explaining more. For example, this week we explained, you know, definition of trauma, PTSD. On a Thursday, we provide announcement on what's coming, you know, at Beyond the Veil, so you can be aware. On Saturday, we share self-care tips. You know, we came up with, you know, this great project about, you know, Sunday, Beyond the Veil Sunday, hard reset. It's about taking a time, 3 hours to 12 hours away from all distractions, you know, phone, things that, you know, distract you, to spend more time on yourself. You know, join us. You know, here we are with our great team from Beyond the Veil. Most of everybody's here. Kagame, you see days behind those beautiful posts you see on social media to put together content. We have our secretary Judith, our project coordinator Sibo. I saw Sheila as well, our treasurer, and our Rwandan representative and counselor in Rwanda was here, Kanes as well. She's not feeling well, she left. But we just want to let you know we have like a beautiful and an amazing team that is here to help you. And if there is any way we can accommodate and, you know, provide more information that are more relevant to the Rwandan community, do not hesitate to reach any one of us, you know, give us suggestions, you know, topics, ideas, things like that. So I'm gonna allow Sibo if she has a question or if she wanna say something. Sibo, please, so we can be able to close anytime soon. If you have any question, we're opening a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Actually, I was clapping. For me, it was a reaction clapping, and I will send you my questions, Mr. Diaz. I have so many, so I cannot ask them now.
Yes. Sure, no problem, definitely. And thank you for the applause.
Yes. Anyone else who have a question? We can welcome one question.
Well, we can thank you for putting this together and for hosting this amazingly and for Beyond the Veil. So thank you,
Yes.
Lydia. You forget to thank yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I think we're gonna close this session. I think next weekend, next Saturday, I sent a message. If you wanna send us your email, we can always update you. Otherwise, we're gonna share the next event on Saturday on our social media platform. Yes, yeah, we're gonna share information. We're gonna have Noah Mujeni coming up to share information about, mental health resources that you can access here in Canada. So, and we're gonna, find ways on our social media we can share for both Canada and Rwanda as well, when you can access mental health resources. Yeah, I'm gonna have to close this conversation. Thank you everyone who joined us. And there are people who are joining this conversation. Someone reached out to say, can I have like, a certificate, something like that, that have attended this workshop? Yes, you can send us an email. I'm gonna, you can reach out to us. We can arrange that part. And I think I'm gonna close this session. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Brent. Have a nice weekend, and we appreciate your presence, everyone. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.